You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello, everybody. Once again, we are back. This time it's Monday, and yes, once again, unfortunately, I'm by myself. You guys are going to have to pull me through this again. And of course, once again, we do have the ability for you guys to call in, which you guys might actually want to call in tonight because this is going to be a pretty fun topic. We're going to be talking about 10 things, and of course, this came from ScreenRant.com, just so you guys know. You know, we pull a lot of stuff from Screen Rant all the time. They have a lot of really cool discussion topics and things like that, especially as it relates to Star Wars. So once again, we're going to do that. It's going to be 10 things from the Clone Wars that didn't age well. And this one's a pretty good list, I got to tell you guys. Ted's with us. He says, poor Daryl, hope he can make it next week. He says he should be able to make it next week. I think he just got really hung up at work or something like that. So I'm really hoping that next week things will be somewhat back to normal. The place that he was broadcasting from, we had to move out of that place. So there is that, and of course, eventually I'm creating a studio in the basement, so I hope to get that done pretty soon. So just bear with us on some of the stuff. But we got to talk Clone Wars here, guys. So first of all, and you can put this in the chats if you want to, what are some of the things that you didn't think aged well in the Clone Wars? I'd be really curious on that. Of course, we're going to go through Screen Rant's list in a few seconds, but I also want to get anything that might not be on this list. I want you guys to talk about it. Because again, we're going to be here all night. Well, not all night, right? But a lot of the night. I love to talk Star Wars with you guys. You know that this show can be a lot of fun, especially when we're all chatting and discussing stuff. And again, it doesn't necessarily have to be on topic, although, tonight it probably wouldn't hurt. So without further ado, let's get into this. The first thing is Ahsoka's outfit. And this is funny because I totally forgot about this. I completely forgot that Ahsoka had this whole midriff cut outfit at first. And at first, that's what I thought that they were talking about. I thought that maybe they were talking about the fact that, she's supposed to be 14 years old or something. And they got her in this midriff cut outfit or whatever. And we know that George Lucas sometimes can push the envelope, right? I mean, look, there's the infamous bikini scene from Return of the Jedi. There's a whole little Natalie Portman dominatrix thing from Attack of the Clones. So Lucas is no stranger to maybe, dressing some people up a little bit. But ironically, what they were talking about in this had nothing to do really with that. It was more to do with the fact that she's out there battling people or whatever, and she has no armor, which I thought was actually pretty funny because instantly my mind went to, oh, they probably think it's inappropriate due to her age, or maybe they thought it was a little bit exploitive or whatever. But nope, that wasn't it at all. Actually, it turned out that they were just going for something a little bit more in-universe, right? So that's okay. Let's see, we got something from Ted here. He says, the only thing from the Clone Wars era that didn't age well was me. Yeah, I hear you, buddy. I think about the fact that I've been watching this stuff since, everything came out, right? 1977. I was right there. My dad took me to the theater to see the first Star Wars, like I said yesterday, even before it was called A New Hope. And, it was just one of those things where you don't really notice the passage of time that much, especially because for me, there was always something to get involved in. There was a little bit of a gap between the end of Return of the Jedi, let's say, and then when the expanded universe picked up in 1991. There was a little bit of a gap. But then again, I was also, going into my teenage years and getting into the whole school thing. Now you're starting to be interested in girls and that kind of a deal. So I mean, I don't want to say it took a backseat because I was always into Star Wars. I was just relegated to the fact that, you know what, this isn't going to ever be anything other than these 3 movies. And then when the expanded universe came out and it was in book form, that was phenomenal. And I really, really got into that. So, but I understand what you mean. You know, the whole age thing. I mean, I look at the fact that I just turned 54 and I'm just like, dude, really been that long? I'll tell you what actually freaks me out. It's when people who, like, they have kids, you know, when I met them or whatever, their kid was like, 2 years old and now they're like, 20 or something like that. That sort of gets to me. The second one in this list is Zero. Whoa. This thing's like, oh man. It's like, you're actually getting this stuff too soon. I don't want to reveal everything just yet. Wonder why it did that. Let's see. Well, anyway, it's Zero the Hutt. Let me see if it does it again. Yeah, it's going to do it again. Must be on some sort of automatic thing. I'll fix that while I'm talking about it. But Zero the Hutt, he was another one who, quite honestly, excuse me, he wasn't that popular. Like, people really didn't like him very much. I have to admit that when I first saw him, I wasn't 100% into him myself. Like, I thought he was just a little bit too on the nose with things. But I don't know. He sort of grew on me, to be honest. He was one of those characters that after a while, I actually started to warm up to him. Now, of course, some of the problem was that he is the only Hutt that spoke Basic. And because he was the only Hutt that spoke Basic, people thought that made him a little bit less threatening. So that's understandable. Of course, he was modeled after the actor Truman Capote, who was openly gay. And the problem that a lot of people had was they thought that maybe it had some negative gay stereotypes or something like that. I'm not 100% sure, but that's pretty much what Screen Rant is pointing out here. The Hutts have always been the villains, and Zero was no different. He was a little bit craftier, but at the same time, I think that the first impression just sort of nuked out any seriousness that anybody could take this guy. I mean, if you think about it, one of the things that I thought was pretty cool was that he was so different. Like, I actually really enjoyed the fact that he was a different kind of a character. I mean, at first I thought, what are you guys doing? This is kind of stupid. I don't know if I'm really into this, but I have to say, like I said, he really warmed up to me in a big way. I thought, you know what? This guy is a different kind of a character, and I can handle that. I don't know if I like the fact that he spoke Basic, but I think it also added just to the type of a character that he was. I think that ended up being okay too. So pretty much Zero was somebody that I don't think that people necessarily thought aged well, but it is what it is, right? The other thing is a slavery arc. Now, this one, number 8. Number 8 is really interesting to me. Number 8 is something that the Clone Wars did a lot that I actually appreciated, and that was the fact that there was a lot of more adult themes, actually. A lot of adult themes. And I appreciated that about the Clone Wars, that they weren't just going to be some kid's cartoon show or whatever. And the nice thing is, in dealing with these more adult themes, and again, kids are way more sophisticated nowadays than what a lot of people, think, right? People don't give credit where credit's due. Kids don't necessarily need Jar Jar, pretty much acting silly or doing whatever in order to appeal to kids. Kids do like more serious type of plots. This might be a little bit much, though. It was it was an entire arc, though, that was dedicated to slavery. We always saw, Anakin, of course, was a slave. We saw slavery depicted. We even saw it, obviously, in The Last Jedi. But this was an entire story arc. And, it basically showed, let's see what they say here. Season 4 showed main heroes like Anakin, Ahsoka, Obi-Wan, and Captain Rex getting captured and brought into the Zagirian slave trade. And I do remember that arc. I mean, I don't remember, like, every little thing in all the episodes because, again, you have to remember that, it was like, I don't know, 22 episodes per season, and there ended up being 7 seasons. And I know season 6 was basically what was left over from when Lucas sold Disney. He was kind of in the middle of making season 6 of the Clone Wars. He didn't finish it, so what they did was they just cobbled together what they had and put it out. But at the same time, and I think that this is what's important, is the fact that the very next season was probably one of the best seasons ever. That was made in 2020, and that was when, obviously, Filoni decided he wanted to cap it off. He didn't want to leave it unfinished. Although I actually thought that season 5 would have made a good point to wrap it up. But, again, I'm not entirely sure that Filoni's intention was really to have it go that long. I think that was more of a Lucas thing. I'm not really sure, but I think it's definitely along the lines of you have this the story arc that's pretty dark, and then of course it goes into something light, and this is going on and on for 7 seasons. Because if you think about it, a lot of times they would do that. They would alternate lighter and darker storylines. Remember that whole droid thing that they had? That thing drove me insane. I hated that because it went on forever, and it was just a bunch of the droids led by 3PO, I think, just trying to, find their way back or something. I mean, a couple episodes is cool, but I think that thing went like 4 episodes or something. And that was back when they were releasing them just like every week. So you actually had to wait a week in between each episode, and you were sort of primed to see what was coming next, and, we got that instead. Another one, number 7 on Screen Rant's list, is the Banking Deregulation Arc. Now, this one, I vaguely remember. I have to admit, I don't 100% remember this story arc, which is probably reinforcing why it's on this list, because again, it wasn't something I think that stuck out. I don't know. I might actually go back and watch it and be like, oh, this is pretty cool. But according to Screen Rant on their list, it's really one of the worst story arcs that they had, right? So the intergalactic banking clan was one of the most structurally important aspects. We know that. So yeah, it was basically in season 6, and again, season 6 was a little uneven because of the fact, like I said, it was basically a half-finished season. Rush Clovis took over as an adjudicator of the IBC as they faced financial collapse because of divided funds between the Republic and the Separatists. And then, of course, Clovis worked alongside Padme Amidala to expose the banking clan's deceit and exposure to the Republic. The politics of both arcs fell flat, especially when there were more likely other ways of displaying these structures, or struggles rather, without discussing banking and bank deregulation. But again, I have to say, I don't 100% agree with Screen Rant on this. Now, as far as the quality goes of this particular story arc and, the episodes, I can't really speak to it because, again, I haven't seen these in a long time. But I do think, though, that some of this stuff, while to most people, maybe it falls flat because, again, a lot of people want to see lightsaber duels and, all kinds of other stuff. But sometimes I think this stuff could be interesting. But the thing is, it has to be presented in a certain way in order to capture an audience, in order for people to like it and actually want to view it. It really is too bad that Daryl isn't here, because when we go back and forth on on some of these things, it's actually cool. I keep feeling like I'm actually blowing through this list. And again, if you guys want to call in live, you could do that. We can talk about some things. But once again, bear with me. Daryl should be back next week, and we could actually do this. So number 6. Number 6 is interesting. This is Obi-Wan left his enemies to die these horrible deaths. Which actually, when I stop and think about it, he really did. He really honestly did do that. Let me see what they say. When he went face to face with Darth Maul, he wasn't expecting to also be going up against Savage Opress. With the help of Visage Ventress, Kenobi was able to escape the brothers. But how Ventress and Kenobi left their enemies is by far one of Obi-Wan's darkest moments. So this is after the Savage and Maul duel during the Clone Wars. They're not talking about the Phantom Menace duel with just Darth Maul. So basically, what they did was they got in the ship's cockpit, they detached it from the rest of the ship, leaving Maul and Savage stranded in the vacuum of space. They seem likely to die a slow, cold death. Now, again, we know that essentially Darth Maul is kind of like the Jason Voorhees of the Star Wars universe. He's not going to die anytime soon. So that notwithstanding, it's really from Obi-Wan's perspective. What did Obi-Wan expect? And the outcome that he expected maybe was a little bit cold. Okay, the next one is the Martez Sisters. The fact that they added very little to the final season. And I agree with this because they were in some ways like a gateway to the Pikes, to some of the other storylines where Ahsoka had to try to rediscover her wanting to use her Force powers. And these were characters that were designed to give Ahsoka someone to care about, somebody to maybe pull her back in, although she did take her sweet time doing it, if you remember the story arc. But I do admit, though, that even though I didn't necessarily hate these characters, and again, I don't know if I agree that they offered little. I would say that maybe they were underutilized would probably be the better way of putting it, because I don't necessarily think that they're throwaway characters. I just think that they could have done a little bit more with them and maybe not drag out that story and end up being like half the season. I mean, again, you don't want to resolve it too quickly, but at the same time, I don't know. I think that it's somewhat of a dangerous move. And so Screen Rant's basic premise here is that the characters failed to connect with the audience. In many instances, Rafa seemed unnecessarily rude, and Trace was overly naive to the point where it became annoying. I mean, I can't argue with that. I have to admit that, again, these characters are characters that don't necessarily add anything of value to the story, other than the fact that they're the ones that are essentially bringing Ahsoka back. Okay, so that was the whole idea behind that. All right, number 4. Number 4 is the Clone Wars animation. Now, this I can't honestly say that I disagree with either, because the animation was a little bit rough at first, right? It was a little bit rough. It was a little bit maybe not the best. It definitely improved after the first couple of seasons. I mean, I will admit that. But, at first, it just wasn't up to what I think Lucasfilm could do, what they were capable of. I think they were still experimenting with the animation style, because if you notice the first couple of seasons, it's a little bit more cartoony than what we got in later seasons. And of course, as the technology progressed, you got even more, a lot better, I mean, not just the animation, but I know they brought in more people. I think Filoni got a little bit more comfortable doing animation. So I think that that's something that naturally would improve over time anyway, simply because, again, animation technology keeps improving. But I do have to agree with Screen Rant that maybe it was a little bit rough in the beginning. All right, number three. Number three, where bioweapons were created and used. Basically, they were accidentally used. So, I could see maybe now in today's day and age how perhaps because we've had more experience with bioweapons, and then of course it was all COVID thing. I think maybe that's why. But and that's pretty much what Screen Rant's point is as well. In an age where a global pandemic sits firmly in the audience's periphery, seeing a scientist purposely create a virus that is designed to wipe out innocent people hit a little too close to home. So maybe, again, I don't necessarily. I think you'd have to be pretty sensitive to be bothered by this, but I could see where if you're just looking at it from the standpoint of how is this aging? Because there's a couple of different things that will affect age, or at least how a particular project ages. The first thing, of course, is just if it had social relevance in the time period in which it was created, that social relevance might get lost as things progress. There were a lot of things, and we see this all the time now with movies. There's warnings in the beginning of movies in case somebody's triggered. It's like, warning, this was made during a completely different time period where certain things that we don't feel are okay anymore were pretty okay back then. So you have to take that with a grain of salt, right? You always have to put whatever project it is within the time frame it was created. And while certain things may seem distasteful now, back then they were more the norm. And I don't know if this is really the case of that, because besides that, of course, the technology of the project itself, that's something that will determine. I mean, if it's an animation style that was of a particular time, it runs the risk of looking dated and maybe not aging too well. At this point, I don't know if I necessarily agree that it hasn't aged too well. Certainly you guys can weigh in if you want, but I really just look at it as it's another really cool story. I mean, look, after JFK was assassinated, maybe that wasn't the coolest thing for the first few years to depict in a fictional story, but these kinds of things happen. It's a story arc that really has relevance in all time periods. I mean, you've had political leaders being assassinated since, practically the beginning of time. So it is something that comes up periodically. Now, with this virus thing, again, I think a lot of it is sensitivity, and it just really honestly depends on where you land with this. For me personally, I'm fine with it, but, that's me. All right, and this goes along with it. Our number two basically goes along with it. Number two is that the Jedi committed war crimes. And again, it's not so much that they committed the war crimes so much as that they're supposed to be the good guys. Now, I think that what's happening is that Lucas was trying to convey that even though the Jedi were the good guys, they still weren't above being corrupted. And they weren't corrupted in the sense of, I'm going to turn to the dark side or whatever. They were more corrupted in the sense of they thought that they were doing the right thing, and they started to compromise their ideals in order to achieve what was right. And that, unfortunately, pulls you on a darker path where you look up one day and you're now part of the problem. You're now what you once opposed. And I mean, you can really honestly say that about politicians, because that's often what happens to them. They start out ideal and they want to make a difference and they want to right all the wrongs and all that stuff. And then they're basically told, you know what, you got to change it from within. So you got to play the game. You got to play the game for a little while, and then you can make your changes as you're doing that. But what so often happens, you start to play the game for a while, you become the player, right? So now these people are, it's just how you get things done, so to speak. And I think that that's where we're coming from with the Jedi as well. Screen Rant's basically saying, the war crimes are meant to be played off as funny, but in reality, they're kind of horrifying. Like, Ki-Adi-Mundi was using a flamethrower. Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Mace Windu are torturing prisoners to get intel from them. And, the Jedi attack fleeing combatants. So you can understand from, I mean, I hate to say the words, but from a certain point of view, why people might look at that like, well, and again, some of it is played up for laughs. Some of it is where you're not trying to completely sanitize the whole war aspect. Because look, this is called Star Wars, right? It's not Star Politics. It's not Star whatever. It's Star Wars. So war a lot of times is unsavory, and a lot of times in war, the good guys have to do some pretty bad things in order to protect the greater good. And so because of that, that's just the way that it goes. So I think that ultimately, while you could look at this as the Jedi are supposed to be good guys, but look at all the horrible things they're doing, I don't know. I think it's just the realities of war, and that's what Palpatine used. He used that to pull the Jedi in, so they had to do these things. They had to compromise their ideals. They had to get their hands dirty. And then, he fakes that whole attack, and then, of course, it's like, look at how the Jedi crave power and are trying to take over. I'll protect you, that kind of thing. So really, from a story perspective, also, it was necessary to do that. It was necessary to pull them in. All right, so finally, what do we got for number 1 here? Number 1, Republic-trained domestic terrorists. I have to admit, I was reading this going, wow, I don't really remember any of this. But you know what? When you actually look at it through that lens, you could very easily see what was going on. There was a 4-episode arc where the Republic sends Ahsoka, Captain Rex, Anakin, and Obi-Wan to the planet Onderon to train rebel fighters. Clearly, the Jedi cannot fight alongside the rebels, since Onderon is a separatist world, but the Jedi still train these rebels to take down the droid army. They even help plan a revolt to dethrone the new king. And you can understand how you're framing that as a good guy sort of a thing, but you can also understand how you can also look at this as the Jedi are basically training these domestic terrorists to go and cause all this havoc. It says, while the Jedi couldn't have known that Saw Gerrera would go on to be the leader of a radical militant group, it was still the Republic's fault. The decisions made by the Jedi are unsettling, which, to be fair, was the whole point. So I get it. I understand where they're coming from here. I'm not 100% sure that I think that you should read that much into it, but I mean, look, we're a Star Wars show. I mean, I think it's safe to say that not reading too much in, that ship has basically sailed or flown off, since we're in Star Wars world. By the way, I have to bring this up. Well, I was actually going to switch gears and do the show on this, but I wanted to wait for Daryl to do it. We lost James Earl Jones today. He passed away at the age of 93. And, we all know there's many projects that we all know James Earl Jones from, but especially in the Star Wars world, the iconic voice of Darth Vader. That was James Earl Jones. And so I didn't really want to do anything today, even though the news of him passing away came down a few hours ago. But at the same time, I also, I didn't want to ignore the fact. But Daryl and I all put together like a little tribute to him. We did that with David Prowse. So we'll probably do that again, where we go through a little bit of his career and just do like a little tribute. We did the most recent one we did was Carl Weathers. Back when Carl Weathers passed away, we did a whole episode dedicated to him. So I'm sure we'll do that in the near future for James Earl Jones. Probably one of the next 2 shows, actually. But I did not want to let tonight go by without acknowledging that. And, it's kind of sad. I mean, granted, the guy was 93, so, it's not like he didn't live a pretty solid, good life. But at the same time, it's still sad. I mean, I remember Daryl and I all the time were talking about with a lot of these projects. It's like, well, fortunately, James Earl Jones signed off on the use of his voice for the whole AI thing for Lucasfilm. And the first example we saw of that was in the ObiWans series. Because in that series, James Earl Jones sounded the way that he did back in the 70s when he voiced Darth Vader for A New Hope. And I thought that was a really cool thing. So we always said, hey, you better start recording him saying the alphabet or different words or whatever, because, and this is when he was like 90. It was like, we don't know how much longer he has. So again, I just wanted to, before signing off for this week, I just wanted to, acknowledge that and how terrible it was. There was another piece of Star Wars news, too, that came down. I'm trying to remember what it was. I was actually going to bring it up to you guys tonight that I thought was pretty interesting. But you know what? I should have written it down. See? I'm such a terrible host. All right. I think that's going to wrap it up for tonight. Like I said, I don't want to drag this thing out. Daryl's not here, and, half the show. I mean, it is called Head to Head, right? So, well, hopefully you guys enjoyed the list. If you didn't agree with Screen Rant's list, or if you did or whatever, just give us a shout in the comment section. Let us know what you guys think. Did you think that, Screen Rant was right, and these are the things that didn't age well? Do you guys have other things that you don't think aged well? Go ahead and put it in. You can put it in the comment section here in YouTube. You can go on our Discord channel. I'm always talking about the Discord channel because there's a couple of things. One, there's a lot of great discussion topics in there, and we can continue the discussion there. The other thing is, to be honest, very often I'm in the Call of Duty lobby, like voice chat, because I'm actually playing. So whether you guys are playing too, or you just want to get in there and talk while I'm playing, you can do that. Anytime you see me in there, just say, hey, what's up? And, we could start a conversation. Again, we weren't able to really do that tonight. Nobody really, I think, wants to be the first one. We had Voyager call in, and I hope that she calls back, because it was a really cool conversation, and she was actually brave enough to call. So, obviously, tonight we're wrapping up the show, but don't forget, we're going to keep this live call-in thing alive, unless, of course, people just don't do it, but it is an option for you guys. You can also go to the website, by the way. I'll put a graphic up that has all that information later. You can also just watch the channel. And until then, Sunday should be our next show. Of course, there's always something to talk about with Star Wars. All right? So with that, of course, as always, I'm Eric Vansel. May the Force be with you. Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.